Hello and welcome to Spy Hard's podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur, sharing Scott's hairbrush.
I haven't had a hairbrush in 5 years.
Well, I'm a bad sharer, so I've actually just taken it at this point.
Wait, no, I should have said, I do have a hairbrush, but I don't have any hair on my head.
Well, then you won't be needing this. Yoink!
I wouldn't use it if I were you, Cam. Get it away from your face.
It's cursed! Help!
Oh,
Help!
no.
I'm like Blofeld!
That's the real voodoo.
I started as Charles Gray and I've become Telly Savalas.
I was going to say Charles Gray now, but either way works. We are so excited to be back in the world of 007. We've got a great review coming up for you with a great guest and a great interview coming later this week. Cam, I'm full of excitement. I'm jumping for joy.
That is right. It's time to kick off the Moore era in style.
Let's do it. Live and let die, baby. Okay, Cam, here we are. We're starting a new journey with a new 007, but we can't do that without a very special guest. Sipping a Sazerac with us in the Filet Soul, he is the co-author of Nobody Does It Better, the complete, uncensored, unauthorized oral history of James Bond, and the co-host of the world-renowned Inglorious Trexperts podcast. It's Mr. Mark A. Altman.
I got just one thing to say.
Yes.
Names are for tombstones, baby.
It begins.
I'm so excited. I'm so excited about today's episode. This is good stuff, guys.
It's a long time in the making. It's been like we're rolling up to 5 years and we've never talked about a Roger Moore Bond film.
Really? Is that true?
Yeah. We've talked about the music because we did a music ranking episode, but beyond that, we've had
some of his guests on. We've had Gloria Hendry from this film. We've had BJ Amritraj. Like, we've had a few people over the years.
Yeah. He was busy trying to construct a solar sail. He was very busy. Okay, that joke would work on the other podcast.
It would work for us, but being Star Trek fans, but everyone else was just sort of crickets there.
Yeah, right.
To be fair, I think we spoke to him about 15 minutes about Star Trek, and I think that probably went over a lot of people's heads too. But yes, we are finally in the trenches with Roger Moore. But before we get there, Mark, we've had you on the show before. We've sort of gone through your Bond history, as it were, what got you into James Bond. But what about Roger Moore as 007? What was your first encounter with Roger?
Yeah, it's really funny. It ties into Live and Let Die a little bit because in 1974, my gateway drug to Bond was my parents taking me to see The Man with the Golden Gun, right? A movie I don't particularly like now, but I loved then, and it made me fall in love with Bond. And I started watching it all the time on the ABC 4:30 movie. And I remember that was back in the time of double features because it was before home video. So they would always show Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun double features. My parents would not let me see Live and Let Die. They was like, you can't see it. But I love James Bond. No, you can't see that one. Can't see that one. I'm like, why can't I see it? Because I guess it was like too violent and too much voodoo. No, I don't know if it's too much voodoo, but it was like, I don't know what it was. And so I think the first time I saw Live and Let Die was on Viewmaster. It was the one James Bond Viewmaster.
Oh.
So I think I watched it on Viewmaster because I always remember that, the Viewmaster was like that thing where you click and it was in 3D and everything.
Yeah.
And it was the one James Bond movie, at least at the time, that was on Viewmaster. And that's the first time I saw Live and Let Die until I finally saw it on the ABC, Sunday night movie. But I didn't see Live and Let Die in the theater until many, many years later. And I just don't know. My parents were really good about letting me see things. They were like, they wouldn't let me see Jaws for a while. They didn't let me see Alien. And they didn't let me see Live and Let Die. Other than that, everything was pretty much fair game. It was really weird. Really weird.
What do those three movies have in common? I'm not sure, but I do have a question about the Viewmaster. Now, when you're going through the narrative of the Viewmaster, what elements did they keep cut out of the child-friendly version?
I have no freaking idea, kid. I mean, come on. It's like, I was probably, 7 years old at the time. I mean, and as much as it resonated, I do remember the tombstones. I remember the snakes because the snakes worked well in 3D.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of Geoffrey Holder, I think, but I don't remember much more than that. I just remember it was really awesome, and I would look at it all the time. And obviously, everyone knew the song because the song was ubiquitous.
Mm-hmm.
It was everywhere. I mean, the two Bond songs to me that were like just you couldn't get away from, nor did you want to, were "Live and Let Die" and "A View to a Kill." Like, those were everywhere. Now, I'm sure in the 60s that maybe, Goldfinger was like that too, but, I wasn't born then. So it was pretty spectacular, and just "Live and Let Die" was like everywhere, that song. And for good reason, because it's a freaking awesome song.
I have to. I hope. I should go do some research and find out. But I really hope the last slide on the Viewmaster was Kananga and his inflated opinion of himself.
Oh,
it might be. It definitely wasn't the post credits. It wasn't Geoffrey Holder on the train. I remember that was the worst way to go to bed. Because the Bond movies would end like 11:30 on a Sunday night, and the next day was school. And it would end with the scene of Geoffrey Holder cackling malevolently on the front of the train. And it was always scary. And I'm like, oh, now I got to go to bed? Because you got to remember, as a kid, it was like, oh, no, Geoffrey Holder was scary as shit. And that ending was always like, it's like, oh, is he going to be back? Is he going to be back in the next one? It's like, no, he's not going to be back. But I love Geoffrey Holder in that movie. Again, it's sort of funny because Golden Gun was a movie that I loved when I saw it and don't particularly like now. It's one of my least favorites. And Live and Let Die was probably one of my least favorite movies, and now I love it. So go figure.
Well, I think you're the right man for the job this week. So I guess that segues us beautifully, Cam, to the question I love asking you, which is, what on earth are we talking about?
Yes, we are tackling 1973's Live and Let Die, which is the introduction to Roger Moore as Agent 007.
And if for some reason you've been sleeping under a rock for the last, 50 years, here is the synopsis for Live and Let Die. Bond is back in action, back with excitement. I love James Bond titles, by the way. I just think they're like the best.
The only gentleman secret agent with a license to kill and to thrill.
My favorite one is always the men want to be him and women want to be with him, or something like that. It's like, yeah, great. That is technically true. James Bond must investigate a mysterious murder case of a British agent in New Orleans. Soon he finds himself up against a gangster boss named Mr. Big. ...
Yes.
So I guess we've sort of got.
That's the synopsis.
That's the synopsis. Yeah, that's it.
It doesn't do justice to the movie.
They rarely do.
The one on IMDb is even worse.
Oh, okay.
I picked that one just because it had like a little bit of mystery at the end with the ... like to lead into something, intrigue. Whereas the other one just talks about like tarot cards.
Doesn't talk about carting around the virginal Jane Seymour around the world as his a consigliere who uses tarot cards to determine who will live and who will let die and all that other fun stuff.
You've just written, I mean, you're a writer anyway, so of course you come up with a much better one than anyone else.
Oh my God. It's such a bizarre movie, isn't it? It's such a bizarre film. It's interesting because, look, you haven't gotten to Spy Who Loved Me. Spy Who Loved Me to me is just like such a great, great Bond movie, and it's big and it's epic. And, there are days where I think in 1977, I may have liked it more than Star Wars. I don't like to admit it, but I think I did.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I could see it.
Live and Let Die is so small. And I think part of that too was, great thing about Bond was it was always about globetrotting, right? It was going around the world, seeing all these exotic ports of call, these amazing places you've never been. And for those of us, like for me in particular, having grown up in Brooklyn, having grown up in New York, so there's a big car chase on the East River Drive. How exciting. And then, and then we're at the UN. How exciting. And it's just like it's like even his helpers were just so bland. It's like Strutter's such a bore. It's like I think what's so interesting is that the villains are just so larger than life and so much fun. And then as much as I love David Hedison, who's probably my favorite Felix Leiter until you get to Jeffrey Wright, It's just like there's not a lot of dynamism in this movie. It's why it's great that Roger Moore is so charismatic and fun, because there's not a lot of other stuff going on in this movie that's charismatic and fun. Although I have to say, every time I'm in New York, I always walk by that Yo Voodoo shop, that ye old You Voodoo shop, because the storefront is exactly the same. And whenever I'm on the Upper East Side, I always make sure I walk down that block, and I'm like, oh, there's the voodoo shop. It's like, even today, it's still identical except for the name of the store. Like, the facade is exactly the same.
I think it's a hair salon now.
I don't remember, but I always walk by it whenever I'm in New York. In fact, I used to live up on the Upper East Side on First and 65th, and I would always, when I was walking to work or going to the subway, I'd always walk by there because I just loved going by the voodoo shop. I don't know why, I just did.
It's interesting though, different strokes for different folks, because Mark, you're talking about like how it being set in New York is a bit less exciting. For me, it's great because it's nice not to have a Bond film, or in fact any major film, not set in the woods of Elstree. Like, everything is filmed around me in sort of West London and sort of Denham around here. So I'm so used to like Return of the Jedi. Like, I could go walk there if you'd like and just send you photos and pretend to be an Ewok.
You guys don't know how good you have it. You both have amazing film locations. Mark, you've got the voodoo shop and many other Bond locations. Scott, you've got almost every other Bond location. I've
got Endor.
You've got Endor. I've got the house from Cats and Dogs.
Oh my God!
Let's not forget Ballistics X versus Sever.
That's true. That's true.
The most hated spy movie of all time.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, Mark, we kind of got your origin story with Live and Let Die there held back, and you've got the Viewmaster. But Cam, what about you? Where did you first meet Roger Moore, and where did you first meet Live and Let Die?
Well, like Mark, I mean, as listeners will know, my first introduction to James Bond was also with a subpar Roger Moore movie. Mine was with The View to a Kill. And so once we watched View to a Kill, my sister and I were ravenous to watch more Bond movies. And so my parents went around and rented up, a bunch of them. We watched Spy Who Loved Me and a bunch of the others. But Live and Let Die was fairly early on that list.
But you didn't have the Viewmaster, did you?
Did not have the Viewmaster, unfortunately. I'm envious. I wish you'd hung on to that Viewmaster for posterity.
Oh, me too.
Be worth something now. But no, like, this one to me played incredibly well when I was young. And it was because it had all the things I was interested in. It had snakes. It had sharks. It had crocodiles and alligators. It had a big boat chase. It had basically wall-to-wall action and chase sequences.
Don't forget a racist Southern sheriff.
Well,
what are you, some kind of doomsday machine, boy?
To be fair, I think at the age of 10 or 11 years old, J.W. Pepper was comic gold, and there was no understanding of really what he was saying.
I love when people compare him to Gillespie in The Heat of the Night. It's like it couldn't be more different.
Oh my God!
It's like, yeah, they call me Mr. Bond. It's like, no, it was so ridiculous. It was so, and not as ridiculous as when he comes back in Man with the Golden Gun. Always one movie too many. It was like we never needed to see, see him again, see J.W. Pepper again. We never need to see Jaws for a second time. We never, all these guys. Who is the one in GoldenEye who's terrific? Who then comes back and World Is Not Enough?
Joe Don Baker as
no, that was in well, he came back from Living Daylights, but came back in GoldenEye as a different character. But
Zukovsky,
yeah, the Robbie Coltrane character.
Robbie Coltrane, yeah.
It's like always one movie's enough. Don't really need these guys a second time.
They knew Mrs. Bell was a one and done. We did not get the return of Mrs. Bell.
I surely am. But oh my God, that whole scene. I mean, that's the problem. This has the most contrived action sequences. It's like a chase at aviation school. Like the whole thing's set up just so he can steal a plane that doesn't fly, that drives around the airport. And it's just like the way they tee up. I mean, admittedly, the whole boat chase is fantastic, but completely contrived. The as amazing as the crocodile escape is at Kananga's farm, let's face it, it's a Batman plot from Batman 66, basically. It's phenomenally executed. It's a great scene, but it's so goofy. I mean, and this whole movie is just full of that stuff. Even starting, I mentioned the East River Drive. the fact that Whisper has this car that shoots a dart, and it's like the driver's like just happens to have his window rolled down, and he shoots him and knocks him out. Like, there seems like better ways to like take out Bond than to like shoot a poison dart into his driver's neck. And it's like, that guy was so heavy, it would have taken 20 minutes for that poison to knock him out. So it's like, the whole thing is like,
what a criticism.
It's so ridiculous. That whole movie is so, and I mean, when I'm sorry, go through the whole movie here, but the whole thing with when I love the twist that you find out that Mr. Big is Kananga, and he takes the Rick Baker makeup off and everything, but it's all nuts. It's so ludicrous.
You've now implanted an image in my head of Roger Moore in one of his safari suits carrying a spherical bomb above his head and running away from the crocodiles. Like, I just want to see that happen now.
I mean, that could have easily happened. That could have easily been a factor in the Roger Moore series.
Like A View to a Kill or something like
Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb.
Just from my side of things, from Live and Let Die, I was a bit of a late bloomer for Roger Moore. Pierce Brosnan was my introduction to the Bond world. I'm the Bond baby here, and I was a bit skeptical of Roger Moore, I have to say. He's not my favorite Bond, and some of the films we're going to talk about are maybe this one, maybe the next one, are some of the reasons why he is particularly my favorite. So I may be the contrarian here of the group. So I pre-apologize to the listeners who might hear me moan about one thing or two. But yeah, with Live and Let Die, a lot of things jumped out to me, like with the score, which I'll talk about, and also just I think this is one of those situations where you look at, say, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where they were a bit unsure with George Lazenby, so they threw everything else at it. Set design, music, side characters, everything like that. Live and Let Die feels the same, where they've got Jane Seymour, you've got Yaphet Kotto, you've got the music, like I said. They're trying to build a better Bond film around a Bond they're not sure of.
Mm.
And I think that's what Live and Let Die always invokes in me. But let's get into the sort of backstory of Live and Let Die. I mean, it's a fabled story. You can go listen to the Roger Moore Bond diaries for a lot of this too. But Cam, can you take us through the story of Live and Let Die?
And also, you can check out Mark's book, Nobody Does It Better.
Thank you. But you also skipped over, you mentioned the Roger Moore's James Bond diary. Now, if you haven't read this and you're a Bond fan, you could probably do a whole episode just on this. It's great. Insane. It is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. In fact, when I talked to Yaphet, we talked a lot about the book, and he didn't like the way that he was represented in there because he didn't feel like Roger actually wrote it. It was like, he said, him and Roger got along really well, and he comes across not particularly well in that book. But this is like in the days before like publicists and studios vetted everything.
Yeah.
It's nuts. It was just reissued a couple of years ago. I have an old dog-eared copy of it, which from the era, but they reissued it, and it's definitely worth reading. It's just like the movie. It's crazy racist sometimes, it's sexist, but it's just kitschy and delightful. And, you just put that stuff aside and just enjoy it for what it is, because it's just wild, that book. I mean, I just couldn't believe the stuff I was reading.
I think now might be a good time to talk about something as well, because Mark, Cam, you brought up Mark's fantastic book. We've spoken about that in the past as well. But Mark has done a great thing for us, and he's become an honorary spy hard this week.
Yay.
I mean, maybe that's not the award that we think it is.
I'll take it. I think it's cool. I like it. I like being an honorary spy hard. There's not a lot of podcasts I would accept that honor for, but spy hards, I'll definitely take it. I'm very happy. Right. You guys are great, and and you really helped us out at in Vegas at the Star Trek Las Vegas. You did a great panel on spy Star Trek. You got spy movies in my Star Trek and Star Trek in my spy movies. So no, I'm very happy. I will take that honor. And in fact, I will unanimously make myself the head of the Kennedy Center and take never mind, different podcast. Thank you guys. I'm very honored.
Well, the reason why Mark has become an honorary spy hard is because he's lending us a treasure from the depths of his archives of the plethora of James Bond interviews he did for his book, which we've mentioned. There'll be links in the show notes below. You can go grab a copy of the book. He's giving us the audio of his interview with Yaphet Kotto, and you're going to get to hear from the man himself. He's not with us anymore, as we've said, Yaphet Kotto, but he's talking about Live and Let Die. He's talking about the character of Kananga. He's talking about Roger Moore. And that's not something you can get anywhere. It's not been published. And this will be the first time people are actually hearing his words. And I think that's just a fabulous thing. And Mark, I thank you on air. I want to thank you for giving it to us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I just want to say this. I chased Yaphet for a long time for this book. I had already interviewed Jane. I interviewed Gloria for the Live and Let Die. Tom Mankiewicz many years ago. Obviously, he had passed away by the time I wrote the book. But I really wanted Yaphet because I was a huge fan of his for obviously Homicide, Alien, Across 110th Street. And I got him, and I had so much fun talking to him. He was in the Philippines, so it was tough. That's where he lived. And he was very outspoken. And once you got past the crazy, he had really interesting things to say. He was kept obsessing over the fact that he hated the way he died, spoiler alert, in Live and Let Die, and that he thought that Barbara Broccoli should bring him back and admit that it was a double or that it wasn't really him who died in Live and Let Die. And, I laughed, but then he kept going about this and it wasn't a joke. He was serious. And, but he definitely was a guy, he was an actor, kind of like Marlon Brando, a method actor, very seriously, very talented. And I think, Hollywood kind of looked at him as like, sort of crazy. And so like, he didn't get, he's very outspoken, like on Homicide, he butted heads a lot with people, but he was great. And, he's just great in everything. Anytime you see Yaphet Kotto, he's always great, right?
Mm-hmm.
Except maybe The Running Man, not so great, but he's so great in everything. And so I was so, I hate this word honored, but I was truly honored to have the chance to talk to him. And he passed away a couple of months after I talked to him. And, I'm so glad to be able to share the interview with your listeners because, obviously just a small fraction of what we talked about is in the book. So it's great that people can actually hear it in his own words because I really just liked him a lot. Like, I just thought he was a really interesting guy and he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. And he was really passionate about this movie. And, he was very proud of it because he's first black man play a Bond villain, first black man to kill a white person on film. I think he said first black man in space. He said in Alien, a lot of these, really remarkable firsts and, just a terrific actor. And, some of the stuff that has been underreported, like, both Tom Mankiewicz and Yaphet Kotto felt very strongly that the woman that Jane Seymour played should have been an African-American woman. And they had been talking about people like Diana Ross to play that role. But the studio, remember, this is 1973, was really worried, like, if the cast was too black, that it wouldn't play in the South. And so, Gloria Hendry ends up getting the smaller role. And then they cast Jane Seymour, who is wonderful. I mean, she's one of the great useless Bond women. There's like the resourceful Bond woman and the useless Bond woman. Jane Seymour plays the useless Bond woman, but she's amazing as it.
Mm-hmm.
She's just, she's gorgeous. And I'm so glad we could share. The point being, I'm glad we could share the Yaphet Kotto interview with everybody because I thought he was terrific and candid and raw and honest and proud. And it's great. And I think he really would have liked to have thought of himself as the African-American Marlon Brando. And in many ways he was.
Yeah. And didn't approach this as that was just a job, whatever. It's like still passionate about Kananga, which, is fantastic too.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so interesting because he's playing this, multiple roles. I mean, he's playing Mr. Big and Kananga, and that, not that it's a great surprise when he reveals his true identity, but it's still it's like an interesting gag, and, it's been suggested that, part of the problem is that, with the Bond in this movie, is Bond comes across sort of behind the eight ball all the time, that he's always having the wool pulled over his eyes, that he's not particularly smart, like in the Filet of Soul where he gets caught and, again and again, Bond isn't doing very smart things, which is a problem. But, I know, Scott, you talked about how you weren't a huge Bond fan, Moore fan. I'm a huge Moore fan. Like, I'm a huge Moore fan. I mean, Connery's my guy, but I'm a huge Roger Moore fan.
Yeah.
So, like, I love Roger in this, but like most people, it wasn't until his third movie that I really thought he, in Spy Who Loved Me, where he becomes Bond, but I still really like him in Live and Let Die. What I love about him is he's so different than Sean, which is why I think it works. Whereas George Lazenby, who I also love to an extent, is just trying to do Connery. And what's great about Roger is Roger's doing Roger. So it's a very different performance. So that's why I don't think that Connery and Moore necessarily are competitive in my mind. They're different. And I love that because I don't know, you can't, there's only one Sean Connery. There never will be another. He's so unique. And Roger is just doing his Roger thing. And for the 70s, it felt right. You know, especially you got to remember this came out at the same time as Watergate and all these horrible things that were going on in the world in Vietnam. And it's like, so it was time for the light Bond. And it's a lot of people talk about now. It's like, oh, what should happen with Bond now that Daniel Craig is done? It's like, should it be that kind of throwback where you do something completely different than Daniel? Do you try and do this sort of dark, edgy, brooding, more of that? Well, we've done that for the last, 40 years that Daniel Craig's been playing it. It feels like that, it takes him 900 years to make a Bond movie. But, so should it be something lighter and more frothy? Because that kind of was what happened. That's why Diamonds Are Forever feels so weird, because that doesn't feel like right for Sean Connery. That almost feels like a Roger Moore Bond movie, which is.
Well, a lot of people say like he should return to either the Roger Moore era or like the Pierce Brosnan as a good template. Personally, I'm campaigning for a go back to David Niven.
Yeah. You and who else? It's just you'll be an audience of one.
There are dozens of us.
Dozens. Yeah.
I'm a Barry Nelson guy myself, so.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
See, I prefer Jimmy Bond, Woody Allen. That's my Bonds.
Of course.
We're all over the spectrum of Bonds here by the sounds of it. But look out for the Yaphet Kotto interview in your podcast feeds. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already. But Cam, let's go behind the scenes of Live and Let Die.
Yeah, so the producers wanted to basically cash in on the blaxploitation craze, which was really big in the early 70s with movies like Cotton Comes to Harlem and Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song and Shaft. And they were looking to kind of tap into the grit, the urban settings. And so that persuaded them to adapt Ian Fleming's second novel, Live and Let Die, which was published in 1954, the same year as Barry Nelson rightfully took ownership of the Bond role on Climax, the TV series. And so,
hey, can I interrupt for just a second? I'm sorry. People right now are writing into the Spy Hard saying that guest was so annoying. He kept interrupting the host. I don't like him. But I just want to add something to what you just said.
Add away.
It's interesting because Mankiewicz was given a couple of books. Tom Mankiewicz, the writer, and they said, "What do you want to adapt?" This was after Diamonds Are Forever was, very, very successful. Mm-hmm. And he was the one who said, not that it would have mattered what he said. He wasn't the final vote, but he was the one who said he didn't want to do Moonraker because it felt dated. He said he felt Live and Let Die was very contemporary because it dealt with drugs. It dealt with, with the success of blaxploitation movies at the time. It felt like the one to do, and everyone agreed with that. So I just wanted to add that to what you were saying.
Yeah, because Mankiewicz is coming back from Diamonds Are Forever, which he also worked on, and he is from a famous lineage. He's the nephew of the co-writer of Citizen Kane, Herman Mankiewicz, and the cousin of Oscar-winning director, writer, producer Joseph Mankiewicz, who made movies like All About Eve and The Ghost and Mrs. Muir, and also Five Fingers. Cleopatra. There's another one. And Mankiewicz got to start actually shooting second unit on Cleopatra. And also went on and became like a production associate for a little while, and also began writing TV in the 1960s and rolled into movies like The Sweet Ride and Diamonds, and then jumped right into Live and Let Die from Diamonds.
Can I just say for color, I love Tom Mankiewicz. I only interviewed him once. I didn't know him well. I probably interviewed him for about 3 hours.
Wow.
He was so great. He's one of these guys. He reminds me of my friend Alan Spencer. Just super erudite, super funny, really passionate, great stories, a great raconteur. Part of the impetus of me doing my book was years ago. After I'd done my License to Kill issue of Cinefantastic, I had pitched them on doing a double issue in the history of the Bond movies because I'd done this great interview with Richard Maybaum, and they said, "Okay, great." So I started doing interviews. One of them was Tom Mankiewicz. Then they changed their minds, and we ended up not doing it. So I had this incredible interview with Tom Mankiewicz that had no home. So after the success of the Star Trek book, I'm like, I was dying to do a Bond book primarily because I wanted to use this interview with Tom Mankiewicz and didn't know where to use it, and because I just love that guy. I found him so interesting, and he just loved Bond. I love people who are passionate about what they do. Like I love the Star Trek people who like are passionate about it, who aren't just it's not a job. And Mankiewicz was like passionate about Bond. I didn't always agree with his take on Bond, but I loved him and I loved his take. And also he has some of the great one-liners in the history of Bond. You know, you see that in Diamonds Are Forever. Even the lines that are memorable but aren't great lines, like I didn't know there was a pool down there. You know, it's just like so many great lines. And it was the same with Live and Let Die. Nice Bond, white man in Harlem can follow you like a cue ball. I mean, it's just like so funny. I mean, he was very erudite. You get a sense of that Mankiewicz family wit, that's so brilliant in stuff like All About Eve. I just really love Tom Mankiewicz. So I just wanted to say that because who else is going to say that? You guys didn't know Tom. So
That's
I'm
true.
just going to, I didn't know Tom. I interviewed him once. So who am I to say? But I just love him. And I would always go to his movies like Delirious. And I was hoping like, well, this will be like, now he's, it's his movie. It was never the same, but his Bond stuff is great. And obviously his work on Superman is unparalleled, on Superman 78. So just phenomenal. If you ever watch him on the DVD Blu-ray special features, he's always just so witty and insightful and just huge fan.
And it's interesting with Live and Let Die because a lot of the racial elements, obviously now, are a little sometimes difficult to watch. But at the time, Mankiewicz actually, he was saying this is a movie made at the time of the Black Panthers and the Black Revolution, and he really thought like if he could walk that line perfectly, it would really add a lot to the franchise. Now, obviously, things change over time, but at the time, he was really hoping that he could kind of inject some edginess that would actually work and be respectful.
Yeah, I want to jump in there because obviously, look, there's a lot of racism in the book.
Oh,
we all
yeah.
know about the infamous chapter in Heaven in this Fleming book. Fleming was he was, widely considered a racist and anti-Semite. But the thing about the Bond producers is they weren't. And it's like Yaphet Kotto was the guy who said to them, look, this is a time where you had stunt people doing blackface because there weren't black stunt men widely in the business. Women, there weren't a lot of women, so black men would or would do double, black women. I mean, it was like so. But it was Yaphet Kotto said you need a black stunt coordinator because this is a black man. And Harry Saltzman said you're absolutely right. Roger was super supportive, and Roger, Gloria Hendry didn't get the kind of obviously perks that Roger got, so he would take her to work in his car, and if somebody stopped them for an autograph, he would sign it and then hand the picture to her and have her sign it. Like you can't emphasize enough because we tend to apply our modern day sensibilities to eras that were completely different, right? This was actually a very I don't know if progressive is the right word, but this was not a racist or and in fact, who do they make fun of? The racist sheriff. So, and the fact that, the African-American characters, have a lot of agency. I mean, Mr. Big has a really, big plan and he is, and it's really interesting characters. So like, I think it's very easy to look back and say, oh, dismiss this film. But I think that given the way that it worked on, Roger and Harry and Cubby and, I'm glad that I don't feel dirty watching it. I feel like they did right by their African-American actors that, yeah, I mean, and I've talked to African-Americans about this movie too. And I remember Mark, we did a panel once, Mark Bernardin once described the movie as playfully racist, which is kind of a good description for it. Because it's not mean-spirited or diminishing. It's just kind of like, it has that kind of Truck Turner, kind of coffee, Foxy Brown kind of sensibility to it, which is of the time. But it's not anything where it's not Birth of a Nation. It's like I think its transgressors are forgivable.
Right. One thing I'll jump in there because there's a quote that I'm probably going to mildly bastardize, but from Tom Mankiewicz about the sort of quote unquote racism of this film, and that is talking about how basically how James Bond always defeats the villain. The villain in this film happens to be black. He's not defeating the villain because he's black. He's defeating the villain because he's the villain.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's nothing to do with the guy's race. And I'm like, well, that comes from the writer, so what more does anyone need? And I will also acknowledge there's 3 white dudes here talking about whether or not this is racist. So there is also that there to point out. But I don't think the intention was to be that.
Exactly. That's the point. And then, look, how people see it, it's a subjective thing. You're right. I mean, 10 different people can see it in different ways. I'm saying from my perspective, such as it is, that I don't find that movie racist. I find that movie borderline, but it's again with the best of intentions.
Yeah.
And and if you listen to Mankiewicz, and he talks about it, he felt the Gloria Hendry character, I mean not the Gloria Hendry, the Jane Seymour character should have been, African American, but they did their best to make a movie that walked that line. And also, you listen to Yaphet, he's very proud of that role. He's not like one of these guys who was given like a step and fetch it role. He loves his character. He's very proud of his character. And, he got it over on Bond as many times as Bond got it over on him. I mean, and there's some very intense scenes. The whole scene where they've captured Bond again and he's trying to figure out if she still has her powers and, asking her about the serial number on the watch. That's a really intense scene. There's a lot of great drama in it. There's a lot of goofy stuff, but then I've said this before. One of my favorite scenes in that movie is the dissolve where Bond is coming over from England to investigate.
Yes.
And you have the voiceover, Jane Seymour say, a man comes, he comes by water, he comes.
Yes.
Now, I don't like the fact that this movie sort of, the ambiguity is like, is this voodoo stuff real or not? It should be ambiguous, right? And it tends to come down on the fact that, no, the voodoo stuff is real, right?
Right.
But because in a Bond movie, I don't think the supernatural should ever be real. But that scene is so great. I love that scene. It's just, that's what I'm saying. It's like, there's not a Bond movie that doesn't have a great scene. Even the worst Bond movies have great scenes. Live and Let Die has a disproportionate number of really good scenes, despite whatever its flaws are.
Yeah. Yeah. And, shooting those scenes, we bring back Guy Hamilton as the director, who's coming back from Diamonds Are Forever and, famously entered with Goldfinger. And not returning as Sean Connery. Now, the studio wanted Connery. Mankiewicz even went to him and pitched the film, and Connery said, "There are only 2 things I've ever wanted in my own life, a golf course and my own bank. I have the golf course, and I'm well on my way to the bank. I'm not coming back." And so, Connery was done.
For now.
Never say never, Scott. Never.
Well, there was the third thing he wanted, revenge.
Yeah.
And that's what Never Say Never again gave him.
It is a dish best served cold.
Yeah, he became a Bond villain.
He did.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
And so did Kevin McClory, but that's another story.
That's right. And so they test audition people like Jeremy Brett, David Warwick, and Julian Glover. They strongly considered Burt Reynolds, who they really liked.
Oof.
Burt Reynolds, of course, it's that Deliverance period. Burt Reynolds is at the top of the world. This is around the Playgirl era for Burt Reynolds, so it did not come to be, but I don't get it. They also looked at Dalton, but Dalton was, wait another day.
Way too young at this point.
Yeah, a little too young. Now, Roger Moore had gotten to know Harry and Cubby while filming the Persuaders TV show at Pinewood, and actually turned down the 2nd season of the show because he heard the Bond role was going to be open. And it was an easy choice. He had the experience, he had the light touch, and Ian Fleming had also really liked Roger Moore when he met him in 1961. And so the only thing that was kind of standing in the way was they were a little bit concerned about the Saint TV series and just the awareness of him as that character. But he just had an in. They just really liked him. And Roger Moore even played Bond in a 1964 skit on the Mainly Millicent TV show. So it was there. It was kind of like Pierce Brosnan as Remington Steele. It was just in the cards.
It did always feel a bit prophesized with Roger Moore. I mean, even looking at like the Saint and stuff, it just feels like they were building to Bond. It's the same with Remington Steele and Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah, totally. And so just some draft differences. The first draft of the script opened with Baron Samedi killing a white man with a machete, followed by Bond's intro. and was going to close out. The final action scene was going to be Bond in solitaire being dragged over a coral reef, which is from the book, but would sit on ice until For Your Eyes Only. It was also going to end with Mr. Big being eaten by sharks, which is also from the book. The next draft changed that to the 3 murders at the start and brought in the Mr. Big inflating bit.
Sometimes it's just a draft too many, isn't it?
Right? Yes.
The old ways are the best.
And now, Mr. Big's alter ego was going to be named Jakata. And when...
Gymkata, the forbidden art of...
That's what the inspiration for that title was, yeah.
The thrill of gymnastics, the kill of martial arts, Gymkata.
The perfect combination, like peanut butter and jam. And productions designer Sid Kane actually came across a trespassers will be eaten sign and stumbled into the world of Ross Kananga, the man who owned the crocodile farm used in the film, the man who did the the leap across the crocodiles. And so they really liked his name, and so that became Kananga as the villain.
I quite like that he gets his reference. I think they spent a lot of time on that crocodile ranch. But if you read the diaries, there's a lot of fraught shooting and a lot of descriptions of pretty crocodiles.
Yeah, yeah.
I never thought I'd have that described to me by Roger Moore, but here we are.
I'm a huge fan of the John Cork documentaries about the Bond movies.
Yes.
And I think that there's some great footage of Kananga's crocodile farm and the shooting of that in the documentary. But for people who just like do streaming, they're missing out, because if you don't have the Bond DVDs or Blu-rays or Laserdisc, those documentaries are sensational. And the one on Live and Let Die is particularly good.
It's like a lost art, those DVD bonus features now. They just don't come with them anymore. I mean, we've had John Cork and his creative partner on those, Bruce Sibley, on the show over the years, and like spoken to them both about putting those together and the amount of work it took. And I wish more people could see it. Unfortunately, a lot of them seem to get uploaded to YouTube, which I think sort of undercuts their work, because you should be sort of paying for the DVDs to watch it, I would say.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I think that also the problem is that the studios used to pay a lot for these, which it required a lot of money, because you had to do interviews. You didn't just rely on the EPKs. You had to find all this archival footage. You want to go, and now there's no value in physical media, or not a lot, so they don't spend the money to do these features. I mean, I remember, I think the last one that Cork did was For a View to a Kill, and it's like you could tell after that, the special features are anemic on all the Bond films. It's really disappointing, because you would think that the Casino Royale actually has some good stuff on it, the collector's edition, the expanded version, but like Quantum doesn't even have a commentary.
Yeah.
And it was like Inspector and Skyfall and it's just like really, and the one that shall not be named should be all have just terrible special features.
I wonder what Mark Forster would say about Quantum of Solace in the director's commentary track, though. Like,
God, I'd love to know.
Messed that one up, didn't we?
Quantum's such an well, that's a whole nother conversation. It's such an interesting misfire, but boy, it looks better in retrospect.
It does in some ways. Yeah. It's aged weirdly well, actually, I think.
It's aged really well. I mean, I remember when I saw it for the first time and was really disappointed.
Me too.
I saw it with a bunch of people, and I was on Castle at the time. I remember we left the writer's room to all go to the ArcLight to see Quantum of Solace. We all came out. We were so disappointed. But boy, 15 years on or whatever it is, 20 years on, and it's like it's held up really well. And it, especially given what was to come, it really is not bad. Particularly if you watch Casino Royale and Quantum back to back.
Yeah, totally.
Plus, that opera scene is just one of the great Bond scenes of all time. So
Tosca isn't for everyone.
So some casting notes on Live and Let Die. Mark mentioned Diana Ross was obviously someone that Mankiewicz really wanted on the movie, but producers did consider Catherine Deneuve.
I wish.
Ultimately hired, though, Jane Seymour off of the BBC period drama The Onid Line. Onedin Line?
Yeah,
I think it's called?
Yeah.
Wanted
In? Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
Wanted In.
Oh, the Wanted, really? Okay.
Yeah, that was what got the job.
You know what's so interesting about that? You really get a sense of the rivalry between Broccoli and Saltzman at the time, because they both saw that and both loved her. But then I think it was Harry that brought her in, and then Cubby like sees her there. It's like, what are you doing here? we've been trying to get a hold of you to come in. And he's like, well, I'm here now. And then him and Saltzman get a huge fight over who discovered her. And she like literally had to leave the room because they're like arguing as though she's not there. I mean, it's just, it's their relationship has so deteriorated by that point, and that, one of them couldn't really be on set when the other one was on set. It was just so sad. And it's also sad the way that Harry Saltzman's been erased from history, because he gave so much to that franchise, which isn't to take anything away from Cubby, who was a genius, but, it's really unfortunate. Like, you'd never hear Harry's name after, after he left after Man with the Golden Gun.
I will just also preface, I actually have no idea if it's Onadin or Wanadin, but I said it with such conviction that both of you were just like, yeah,
we believed you.
This is it. I just didn't want British people writing in to say I was wrong. I'm just confessing I don't know. But I like that you both just believed me. It was great.
We did. Totally. You totally convinced us both. You're a very credible young man.
I was like, well, I mean, if anyone's going to know BBC period dramas, it's Scott. So there you go.
That's true.
Oh, don't forget the other person who was up for Bond at the time was, what's his name? Michael Billington, the perpetual also.
Right.
Almost Bond. Yeah.
Of course.
The many times off. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So Yaphet Kotto was cast by the vice president of United Artists while shooting across 110th Street, which is a great film. And it was a real case of like, well, you want to go shoot a Bond film? It was not a big process for him. It was actually quite simple. And he saw Kananga as a Bond fan. And really that was his approach, was someone who was trying to emulate Bond throughout the course of the film.
Well, we can all aspire to that. I don't think we'd all end up in the same way as Kananga, though.
No.
I do have an inflated opinion of myself.
Also, Bernard Lee almost didn't come back for this movie. His wife had passed away.
Sure.
And so they weren't sure. And so they actually had Kenneth Moore lined up as a replacement. But Bernard Lee ended up coming back.
But Desmond did not.
Yes, Desmond sat out. There's a clear attempt to kind of take away some of the Bond tropes that were familiar to Connery, for this film. The cigarettes, Q. I don't think he ever says shaken, not stirred in this movie. A lot of things that were typical Connery are not applied to this movie.
Yeah, he also doesn't get much of a grand entrance.
No, he does not. We'll get to that in a second. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
The movie shot with an unfinished script. There was a line in the script that just said, "The most terrific boat chase you've ever seen." Well, they had to figure that out.
Don't we see that return as guidance for Casino Royale for like the greatest foot chase of all time?
Something like that. Yeah.
The Malacca chase.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that was the line in the script, and then they just had to just make it out of somewhere.
Yeah, and also they originally had Rosie Carver dying by suicide, jumping off a cliff, and that changed overshooting. That was something that was not necessarily written, the ending she had, up until they did it.
I'm glad for that change.
Yeah, me too. That would have been terrible.
Yeah. And also, Mark mentioned this earlier, the inflating Kananga balloon was done by Rick Baker, who is a 7-time Oscar makeup and effects genius. This was near the start of his career and would work on The Exorcist right after this.
It's amazing. You wouldn't know, because Rick Baker was such a genius, and yet his work on Live and Let Die is not stellar.
No.
And he would go on to do some of the great, he's up there with like Lon Chaney and Dick Smith and, all the greats, right? And yet Live and Let Die is not, his proudest moment.
No. And the budget for the film was $7 million. Domestically, it did 35.4. International, 126.4 for a worldwide total of 161.8. This is actually up from Diamonds Are Forever, which did 116.
That surprises me.
Yeah, people were excited about the new Bond, and people liked Roger, and people were excited. It was a great marketing campaign. I mean, if you remember, one of the great one-sheets in the history of the Bond franchise, just a gorgeous one-sheet. And, the whole campaign was just spot on in terms of, promoting the film at the time. The radio spots are great, which are on that wonderful EMI, I think 25th anniversary collection. It's just that they did everything right to launch it. So it's not surprising that it was such a big success. But what you said earlier is interesting. You're right. The fact that they hid the ball, and it wasn't to do like that. Like Living Daylights has that great introduction of Timothy. Obviously, Dr. No has a brilliant introduction of Sean Connery. Indiana Jones does a lot of movies they introduced there. This does not. It's like it starts with all the murders, the murder at the UN, then the murder in New Orleans. Oh, whose funeral is this? Yours. It's like, and all this stuff. But Bond does not get, this kind of iconic, mythic introduction, which seems odd, but it sort of works.
Well, even George Lazenby gets the long build up with the slight glances
Yeah.
and the fight on the
Totally.
beach, and then it's finally like, oh, this never happened to the other fella. Like, boom, ba da da da. Yeah, it is interesting they sort of hold back. I don't know. I mean, that has to have been a choice, but I wonder why.
I wonder if they felt like they made a mistake building up Lazenby so much, and they were like, okay, just soft sell this.
Well, I think they felt that.
Yeah, just work on Moore's charm and just let it play and let the story kind of come to him.
Sure.
Well, and Roger was more of an adult, He'd been in the business, there was less ego, and I think they didn't want to create a beast because they wanted him around to do a bunch of movies. But I think that's true. It's like they didn't make a big deal out of this is the new James Bond. It's like this is another James Bond movie. It's just the next adventure, rather than Honor Majesty Secrets was about the new guy playing Bond who's replacing Sean, and this wasn't about that at all.
Yeah.
It was just like, it's a Bond movie and there's a different guy who's playing Bond and you'll love him.
Yeah. And so, like, Moore's introduction, big hit, but it did not make the top three. The top three, number one was The Exorcist, Rick Baker. Number two was The Sting. And number three was American Graffiti.
Yeah.
And just a couple final notes. This is definitely the increasing of the friction between Cubby and Harry. We'll talk more about that in the next Bond episode we do. So this was more of a Harry film, and Cubby would handle Man with the Golden Gun primarily. A couple other notes. Jane Seymour and Geoffrey Holder became really good friends off this movie. Really great friends. And he actually designed her third wedding gown.
Huh.
Yeah, she had nothing but good things to say about Geoffrey Holder. She talked a lot about how she felt very alone there. She was only 20 years old. And that he really took her in hand. She said Roger was nice to her too, but he played practical jokes and everything. But Geoffrey Holder took it to a real voodoo ceremony. And they went out and did like photo shoots and all kinds of stuff. She couldn't say enough good things. Everybody loved Geoffrey Holder. He plays this really sinister character, but he apparently, by all accounts, was just a very, very sweet man.
Yeah. And Oscar noms. This movie was nominated for Best Song, but it lost. Here's the nominees. I'll see if you guys can guess.
Okay.
Oh, can I guess before you say the nominees?
Okay.
My guess is The Entertainer, but from The Sting. But okay, go ahead.
Okay. The options are Nice to Be Around from Cinderella Liberty.
Nope.
Love from Disney's Robin Hood.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez, no.
Okay.
All That Love Went to Waste from A Touch of Class.
Okay.
And The Way We Were from The Way We Were.
Oh, that's what it lost to, right?
That's what won. Yeah, The Way We Were.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'll go with what Mark said.
Yeah. And that was actually music. The music for that song was done by Marvin Hamlish, who would go on and do The Spy Who Loved Me. And this was a Barbra Streisand hit.
Yeah. I have to say, since you mentioned scores and Marvin Hamlish, I'm a tried and true John Barry movie fan. Like, I mean, to me, a Bond score is John Barry. Everyone else is also Rands. No one comes close to John Barry. But I have to say that I do think that George Martin did a very admirable job, and that score has only aged like a fine wine. La La Land put out a wonderful version of it a year or two ago, and it works really well. And especially as a 70s kind of blaxploitation movie score, as opposed to like in a way, John Barry is almost too pretty and lush for a movie like Live and Let Die.
Yeah.
So it's like, I really think the George Martin score works really well. I do love the fact that, the producers, when they heard the demo for Live and Let Die from Paul McCartney, the famous line was, well, yeah, okay, this is great, but who's going to sing it? George Martin's like, Paul McCartney's going to sing. Well, maybe we can get like Frank Sinatra or Shirley Bassey. No, you don't get the song if McCartney doesn't sing it. They're like, oh. It's like, oh my God.
As a Beatles and Wings fan, this is one of our wet dreams. Let's just put it that way. It's a convergence, much like spy movies and Star Trek converging. This is music that I love and James Bond converging.
Yeah.
But it's been a long time since this film came out. We've spoken about how it could have aged, all sorts of things. But I'm going to throw it to our guest first. Mark, what's your overall thoughts on Live and Let Die?
Look, like I said, it's a movie that I don't love, but I do like. and has a soft spot in my heart. Again, it's a succession of interesting, fun set pieces. I think, Roger hasn't quite found his Bond sweet spot yet, but it's not embarrassing by any means. And there's some great witticisms courtesy of the pen of Tom Mankiewicz, a really effective score from George Martin, an amazing main title song, because I don't think that the actual title sequence is that great, but the song is amazing. And it's a solid 3-star Bond movie.
Yeah, I can't argue that too much. I mean, from my side of things, I haven't spoken too much about it, but like, this is not my favorite era, and I don't think this is my favorite film of Roger Moore's films. I think it falls in the middle, so I think calling it a 3 out of 5 star is probably bang on for me too. I think the film around Roger is far more confident than he is. I think from Jane Seymour to Yaphet Kotto, as I said, to the score as well. Some of the set design is great. Some of the stunts and the action, the boat chase is phenomenal. Like, you just can't discount that. It's great. It probably goes on a bit too long, but it's great. So yeah, I enjoy any time I watch this film. It's definitely not his worst, but there are moments where I just find like there's like a middle section of this film that just drags watching for me.
Right.
That I struggle to get away from, and I find myself drifting off that I wouldn't necessarily do for, say, The Spy Who Loved Me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it was definitely like a growing comfort with Roger Moore. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I don't think he really finds his stride until the third one, like we've said, but I think that's also the same for many of the Bonds. You could say the same for Sean. You could say, some people even say the same for Pierce. I would say GoldenEye's a better film, but in terms of his performances, I think he's probably better come The World Is Not Enough.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Big time.
And Dalton, we'll just never know.
No, we'll never know. We'll never get to see him fight those robots that he was supposed to fight.
Was that Warhead 2000?
No, it was supposed to be his third Bond film with Eon. It was supposed to be robots, yeah.
Oh, The Property of a Lady. Yeah. Oh, okay. I don't want to see the Rocky V version of Bond, thanks.
With Polly's robot, yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Cam?
So, this is one that I always have a lot of fun with. And the other night when I was watching it, I actually showed it to my girlfriend. It was her first ever Bond film.
Oh, geez.
I decided to
Wow.
jump off the cliff with this one and show her Live and Let Die. And it was interesting to get her perspective on it because she actually really enjoyed the movie, but she was like, the boat chase is too much. Like that, like for her, just completely killed the energy of the movie.
Sure.
And so that was, I think, like an issue. But overall, like it really played for her. She thought it was funny. And it was something that then made me recognize that much more how this one really, I think, taps into the Roger Moore wit really well. Like it understands how to play to that time and time again. And so there's a lightness and an energy that's coming off of him throughout the movie that's going to be more refined, to be more 007-ian in future movies, if that's a term. But here, it's just like every scene, it's the Mankiewicz dialogue and Roger Moore's delivery. And that's kind of like the strength of the movie that really carries you through. So like, even if you're getting too many chase sequences or something like that, the movie's always fun. And it always feels like it has a certain like comic book energy that I think really delivers.
All right, we've professed our love for Live and Let Die, but let's profess it a little bit more. Likes. Mark, you're our guest. Guests always go first. What's like the pinnacle? What's the thing you like most about Live and Let Die?
What's the thing I like most? Well, obviously this is going to be boring. The song, the Paul McCartney and Wings song.
Sure.
I love it. You can't beat that. I made fun of the fact that it's a movie that's shot in New York in the 70s, but I kind of love that it's a movie that's shot in New York in the 70s. It's a little time capsule for me, of that era.
There's that alley. It's beautiful looking. Like when they're going to execute Bond in the alley.
Oh, so great.
Oh, this location is fantastic.
It's so great. And then he does that little jump where he pulls the ladder down and, that little move. It's like, okay, fine. Drop it, Bond. and then Strutter shows up. But it also, I love the way it looks like Mr. Big has the town wired. He has all those filet of soul restaurants, and every taxi cab driver is on the take for Mr. Big. And, it's just, it's so weird. I mean, when Bond is like, goes to the voodoo shop and is hiding under the car, and, what was it? David Hedison says, "Put out a APB on a black pimp mobile." Like, come on, it's so bizarre, and that's what I love about it. It's in all its bizarreness. But I do look. I love Yaphet Kotto. I mean, he's not like a classic Bond villain. I mean, Goldfinger is a classic Bond villain. Dr. No is a classic. Red Grant is a classic Bond villain. Lotta Lenya is. But is Mr. Big a classic Bond villain? No. I mean, that's the thing about the movie. It feels like small. It feels like Bond movie of the week. It doesn't feel like an epic Bond, and yet we all have a soft spot in our heart for it.
And something you touched on there, which is like how there's like kind of like villains everywhere, overseeing things, like basically surveilling what's going on. And that was a concept I don't think we'd really seen before, which is like the idea of kind of like the community of, enemy agents that are all kind of working in tandem. And I like the way that works, where you have the cab drivers reporting. Everyone is on a walkie-talkie, basically, reporting on the activities of what Bond is doing. And it not only gives
He's heading uptown.
It not only gives a sense of like a greater menace that Bond is dealing with, but it also establishes your location really well, because obviously we're dealing with like New York, and it's a beautiful place to be shooting, but also just the idea that like you get the sense like among the like the the rubble or the streets or wherever you are, there's always the sense that someone is watching you.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, when you're up in in Harlem, and it's just like they really like. I mean, that alley is just like, it's so run down. I mean, that whole scene though, where he Bond tries to introduce himself, Sam says his name is for Tombstones, waste him, and he just sends him back. Like, that's kind of cool. And you're like, how's Bond going to get out of this? And like, he doesn't even care who Bond is. And how does Kananga fit in with Mr. Big? And what's this caper? I mean, the problem is when you start to really digest the caper, it's kind of like, why is Bond on this? It's like he wants to corner the heroin market, and it's like in Jamaica and San Monique, and like how I guess the British ambassador was killed. So Bond is on the case, but he's been lent to the CIA. I mean, the whole thing is kind of a stretch, isn't it?
It is.
Well, I mean, if you've seen Wild Geese, you'll know that Roger Moore wants to have his cut of the heroin market.
That's true. Yeah, it's like they introduced like the Kananga element because that feels more Bondian, but nothing going on with Mr. Big would be something that Bond would be getting entangled in. So yeah, and it was funny because when I showed this movie to my girlfriend Sue, the twist of the reveal of Kananga being Mr. Big totally caught her by surprise.
No.
Oh, did it? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, she was like,
that's
what?
really interesting.
And it is fun, like, because she went in with absolutely no comprehension of like the Bond universe or anything. Like, there was no sense of like, oh, I've heard this about this movie. And like that twist worked for her.
I love watching these movies with people who are watching them for the first time, because we've all seen them, like, in some cases, hundreds of times, right?
Yeah.
Maybe more. And so it's so interesting to see, it's like Rutger Hauer and Blade Runner, the things I've seen with your eyes, to be able to see through other people's eyes who are seeing these movies for the first time, and how their perception, like, it's the closest we get to seeing these movies for the first time again. And it's really interesting. So I find that fascinating, you watching it with your girlfriend and her. It was like when I was watching these movies with my son, and how he would, perceive things differently. Like, I mean, I always was blown away during Thunderball. He says, "Oh, that's so cool." I said, "What?" He goes, "Oh, look at how 007 sitting in the 7th chair, and each 00 has a chair." I'm like, "Oh, I never noticed that before." It's so weird to I love watching these movies with people. As long as they're not like laughing at them, like they're looking and fortunately I haven't had that experience. That's why it's always fun to see these movies in a theater. Sometimes at these revivals where they show the movies, because seeing it with an audience is a really great thing, particularly the early movies that maybe you've only seen on television or on Blu-ray or whatever.
Well, I think it demands your attention more as well. Like, you're watching on a big screen, you can take it all in. You're not distracted by your phone or the kettle's boiling or something like that. You're locked in.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and also just like showing her this movie as her first Bond movie, I had the anxieties, in advance. Am I making a mistake? Should I be going with, I don't know, GoldenEye, because it does this with Bond? Wait a second.
Why did you pick that? Can I ask you, like, was it because we were doing this episode? Like, why did you pick this to be her introduction to Bond?
Right? It seemed insane. And like I was getting advice from people. I was like, what do you think? Do I start at the start with like Dr. No? Because that seems kind of odd. Do I start with like, Goldeneye? But that movie's commenting on where Bond is in the 90s versus the 60s, all that kind of stuff. So I was really driving myself up the wall about it. And I just decided, you know what? If we're going to be working our way through the Roger Moore era on the podcast, she can come and sit and watch the movies with me as we go through them.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I was like, okay, let's just start with Live and Let Die. And I thought, you know what? I started with View to a Kill. I became a fan, so it's not like that movie.
And I started with Man with the Golden Gun, and I became a fan, so go figure.
Right? So, started with this one, and she enjoyed this movie. And
she's a keeper.
Yeah. And she said, not to give anything about my own opinion about Man with the Golden Gun, but we watched that one as well. And she just turned to me and says, that wasn't as good as the last one. And I'm like, well...
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Live and Let Die plays.
It's not.
It's one of those like continuing conversations on like social media is what's a good introductory Bond film for new fans? And it is always, as you say, like Casino Royale, GoldenEye, Goldfinger.
Yeah.
Spy Who Loved Me maybe sometimes comes up. Living Daylights comes up quite a bit as well. But yeah, I don't think anyone's ever gone, Live and Let Die. That's the one.
No, it's funny. My son is 15. He kind of lost interest in the Bonds after Connery. Like he loves the Sean Connery Bond movies, and then he likes like Spy Who Loved Me and the Roger Moore stuff, and then I think we finished. I think we got to A View to a Kill, and he hasn't watched the Timothy ones. He has like so little interest in the Timothy ones, and then I said, look, we could skip those and go to Pierce because I think you would like the Pierce. I think you would like Goldeneye, and he just hasn't shown much of interest. He's like, I like the Sean Connery ones, and it's like getting him to watch the rest of the Bond movies has been challenging, and I'm hoping that he will one day because there's some really good stuff that lies ahead that he hasn't seen.
Right. And one thing I found with Roger Moore that actually really worked too was the like the comedic aspects of Roger Moore, the looks, the eye raises, the moment when he's in bed with Solitaire and she is talking and you just get like the Roger Moore eye rolls in that moment. That was like really making my girlfriend laugh. So it became a lot of the comedy of what Roger Moore was doing clicked.
I got a question because you guys are young, and you're all like, oh, worried about perception and all this. So like the socially, social equity and all this stuff. So let me ask you a question. How did she feel when Roger Moore picks the card and it shows the lovers and says, well, the cards don't lie, we'll be lovers. And then you find out he stacked the deck and they're all lovers, right? So he basically tricks her into bed. Like, How did she feel about that?
She actually laughed at that bit.
Ah, good. See, that's good. Okay. That's funny. It's funny. And I know I have a lot of friends and contemporaries and probably younger who would be very offended, take this stuff very seriously. And I think it's so funny.
I think a film that sets itself off with like a guy using a magnetic watch to undress a woman, I don't think you should be taking it particularly seriously.
Yeah, but he also has this great coffee maker or espresso maker.
That's true.
That's ripped straight out of the Ipcris file.
Yes. But that's a weird scene, isn't it, with Miss Caruso?
Yeah.
Like it's almost like to tee him up a little bit, like to show he has game just like Connery. Like he stole Miss Caruso from the Italians, and she's and he give Money Penny. But that apartment is not at all how I imagined James Bond to ever live. And it's just like, oh my God, this is so pathetic. This is not the apartment of James Bond. I mean, this is the apartment of like Mr. Coffee or something. It's just awful. And it's such a goofy screwball comedy sequence. Like she's in the closet and Miss Moneypenny's like, shh, be quiet. Don't tell M. And then, M's bopping around, and then he's oblivious to the fact that Miss Caruso is hiding. It's like all of a sudden we're like in a Preston Sturges screwball comedy, and it's like, but it's not that funny. It's just such a weird scene.
If I can, Cam's been adding notes about his girlfriend. I'll add a note about my wife here because she watched some of it with me. She can't really do Bond films particularly, but her only comment about that intro scene in the kitchen was Bond's coffee making skills are atrocious. He spills it all over the saucer, and then if you actually watch, M spills the coffee on himself because he uses the saucer, and it kind of like drips on him, and you don't really see it, but it's kind of in the background. And so I was paying constant attention to the saucer. It was like a Hitchcock ticking time bomb of when is he going to drop the coffee off the saucer. But yeah, I don't rate Bond's coffee making skills over Harry Palmer.
No, Harry Palmer had a better house. He had better coffee making skills, better glasses. Everything about Harry Palmer in this case was better.
And I think, though, that opening scene does set up kind of the romantic dynamics you're going to get, because she was amused by that. You know, my girlfriend was amused also by the Rosie Carver romance,
funny.
you know, the Mrs. Bond checking to the hotel. So it's like when you got to the solitaire scene, you'd kind of been set up. And I think, though, the producers were concerned. I think they actually were concerned because you have the moment where Bond reveals that the cards, you know, were stacked.
Yeah.
And she says, it doesn't matter. Like, she actually basically lets him off the hook in that moment. I think the producers were thinking, like, we need to have a line where she says, it doesn't matter, it would have happened anyway.
Right, that he's not tricking her into bed. I think they're trying, because Sean Connery projects so much testosterone, is so macho that, you know, he's going to look that more is going to come off badly by comparison, which is why you have to establish he's stolen Miss Caruso in the beginning, and you know, and then he had Joan Collins he sleeps with, and then Rosie Carver. That's another thing that's important. You know, the fact that we forget now, we don't think about it, but in 1973 to have, you know, a white man sleeping with this African American was a wonderful thing, right? Because it's so infrequently ever happened in the movies, or portrayed. It was such a normal thing that nobody would even comment on it in the movie, which is great. You know, so when people say, "Oh, Live and Let Die" is so racist, they forget all this stuff, which was like, it was to have an audience, particularly in certain regions of the world, and particularly in the South here, to see James Bond sleeping with an African American woman casually means nothing. There's no kind of, you know, weird thing, or it's not called out. That's like really important. You know, that's society moving forward in a meaningful way. So you can't just dismiss this movie and say, "Oh, it's racist," which it's not. Ish.
There's a letter that Roger Moore reads out in the diaries that he got from someone in the south of the USA about the lovemaking scene with Rosie Carver, and I won't read it. You can go read the book and find it, but it's not particularly nice. And you just think, like, that's, come on now, folks, we can do better than that. Speaking of better, Cam, what's your like?
So for me, there's an element of a Bond movie that's very important, and when it clicks, it'll raise it up for me, and that is villains. And this movie, Kananga, as Mark said, he's not up there with, say, Goldfinger, but he's very effective. And Yaphet Kotto has a number of scenes that are incredible. I love his entire knife handling skills in the fight at the end. Is like, it's like deranged. It's like scary in that moment. You see this guy who's just so buttoned down, so calm, but when the violence comes out of Kananga, he's genuinely scary. And so I like that aspect. But then all of his henchmen, I think, you know, Teehee with the mechanical hand is really cool. You've got Whisper.
I like Teehee.
Yeah, like the whole gang. Baron Samedi is incredible. I'll probably be on my deathbed and still be thinking of that shot where the bullet goes through Baron Samedi's head and the eyes look up.
Oh, the top hat.
Oh my God. Like, you have this entire collection of great, you know, like a rogues gallery in this film. And each one of them is perfectly cast. It's someone who you immediately sticks in your head through the rest of the film. And so every time they do pop up, like the cab driver, for example, who shows up, you don't have this moment of going, wait, who is this guy again? You know instantly. And it's just perfect casting.
You never forget that afro.
No.
I had that afro in the 70s.
Really? Did you really?
I kind of want to see that photo.
Oh my God.
I'll share my Yaphet Kotto interview. I'm not sharing pictures of me from kindergarten. No.
I will also go to bat for Whisper.
Yeah.
I think the bit where he drops off the champagne in the hotel room, it's like, shall I pop the cork?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
And the villains use the greatest weapon of all, sharks.
Sharks.
Because any Bond film that has sharks is going to raise up a bar, but you've got sharks and you've got crocodiles and alligators. I mean...
Don't forget the snakes. Like, he's taking a bath and he's shaving in the bath and they drop a snake in through the ventilator duct. I mean, that's when I talk about contrived action scenes, contrived jeopardy. It's like, it's all so stupid. and yet it's like I still love it.
It's the simple pleasures of a Bond film, and this
Simple
movie
pleasures.
checks off the ones that I think are at least the most effective to me.
Yeah.
I've got a couple, but I don't think we can go much further without talking about some of the stunts in here.
Yeah.
That whole motorboat sequence is fantastic, and also people don't talk about this, but the double-decker bus, as a Londoner, it's just fun to see it in action. And I've always wondered what happens when you drive under a bridge that's too low, and obviously this is what happens to a double-decker bus. And just to see it in action is always fun.
But that's not what would happen, because they cut the whole thing so that
Let me have it, Mark. Let me have that.
But I love that she had a ride. She had to be on the bus for the stunt, but he didn't. So that shows you a little something about Hollywood of the era. Well, the 20-year-old actress who's been in one thing, she has to ride the bus. But Roger Moore, it's probably not safe. We're not going to have him on the bus. We'll have a stuntman for him. So
he's got a 3-film contract. We can't put him in the bus.
That's another really goofy sequence, but I love it. And you're right. I mean, obviously the thing they talked about constantly was the boat chase. And yes, the boat chase goes on way too long. It feels like its own movie, but it's spectacular. I mean, especially when you keep in mind this is all practical. That whole shot of the boat going across land and knocking over the wedding cake and going back into lagoon or the swamp or whatever is phenomenal. And then the other boat that can't do it, and it's just great George Martin music, chase music for that whole sequence. But it's just like, it just never ends, that boat chase. It's just like, that's usually where I get up, go make some popcorn, see, do we have any bunch of cruncher lying around? Is there something I can nosh on? Come back, the boat chase is still going on, but it's spectacular.
The other one I wanted to bring up, and this is maybe controversial, I'm not sure, but I think the voodoo aspect of this film is genuinely scary. Like Mark, you can talk to us as seeing it as a kid, through your Viewmaster. Even there, I'm sure the voodoo scared you.
The voodoo scared me. I think that's why my parents didn't want me, because they had gone to see it, and I think they felt like this was too intense.
Oh, they'd seen
for
it
a kid. Yeah, they had seen it,
right?
Because then they did not want me seeing this movie as a kid and in theater. And I think it was because of the voodoo. The voodoo stuff is intense. I mean, I think Baron Samedi is scary. I talked about him being on the end of the train at the end. That's scary. I think, the voodoo rituals and ceremonies and the way they use the snakes and everything. This is some scary stuff. And the fact that they imply that Baron Samedi has some real supernatural ability and that he's evil and that he's resurrected. It's scary stuff. I mean, it's weird. It shouldn't be in a Bond movie, but it's definitely dark, and especially for a Roger Moore Bond movie, it's pretty dark stuff.
When Baron Samedi is doing his dance and he's talking in tongues, that sequence, I'm always like, I don't know the significance of the way he's speaking there, because Geoffrey Holder knew something about voodoo, but it's like when you see it on the screen, it has this kind of presence. You almost feel like you're watching a David Lynch film or something for a moment.
Right. It's true.
It's kind of a little bit upsetting. You're like, oh, wow. You can feel like a menace that Bond feels in over his head. Which a lot of Bond movies, that's not the case. He is just wandering through those movies and you're like, yeah, he can handle all this. Whereas the voodoo element feels like something completely outside of his realm of comfort.
Totally. And, Geoffrey Holder also knew about the 7-Up, the Uncola. He used to do those commercials. That's for our older audience. But the thing about that, it's so interesting. I love how he's sort of the entertainment at the resort. He's totally anodyne and just this guy who's an entertainer who's just and you smile oh, this is goofy. And then during these dark rituals, he's the flip side. He's really dark and scary and intimidating and malevolent and sinister. All that stuff's kind of interesting, and then when Baines is killed, by him at the beginning, in the voodoo ritual, they always had the lamest British agents in these movies. They're never as cool as nobody 007. They're always these overweight, lamos. I mean, remember the Octopussy? It's he's running away from the brothers. It's the only one who was any good. You believe, Sean Bean in GoldenEye was the only time there was another 00. They're oh, he's badass, right? And of course, he's still alive. That's the twist. He's actually in the movie. But they never. It's always these guys out of extras casting for 00. It's how did you ever become a 00? I don't believe it.
I mean, I was going to ask Scott how he felt about the sad sack British ambassador at the start at the UN.
Yeah.
who's like sitting there, sweaty, like comb over.
Yeah.
As someone that has once had a comb over, I saw myself in him. So I beg you to take his name out of your mouth, Cam. That's
No, I remember, we used to go on school trips to the UN as kids, and I was always very excited because I'm like, oh, it's like where the British ambassador was killed in Live and Let Die.
Oh.
And also North by Northwest, admittedly. Like I always, that was exciting because, this is, where Thornhill was killed in Live and Let Die, in North by Northwest. So to me, the UN was North by Northwest and Live and Let Die. That's all I thought of when I went to the UN. I probably should have thought about world peace, but never thought about that. I was always Live and Let Die, North by Northwest.
I think you've all missed a perfect opportunity for a joke as well. No one's mentioned in terms of bad 00s. 009, Inspector. He's a big fan of New York, apparently.
Right?
Start spreading the news.
Oh, my God.
And the last I'll leave us on and take us into the next section is, at some point in this film, I think Bond is talking to Solitaire. I think Roger Moore had an out-of-body moment and somehow started channeling either Bill Shatner or Christopher Walken with this line reading, and I'll read it back to you. But you do believe, really believe. And that just jumped out to me, that really staccato way of saying the sentence. I just thought, I don't know what, maybe I spent too much time with Shatner in my life, but I just couldn't unhear that line now. And this is the line I think of when I think of this film.
Doesn't bother me.
I mean, I was thinking of that moment where he's in bed with Solitaire after their first time, and I think he was, I think they had to cut the line where he said, "Beam me out of here, Scotty."
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red Alert Spyhards, we are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Live from Las Vegas, it's the Sci-Fi Summer of 1979 panel, hosted by the Inglorious Trexperts and featuring Scott and I among a bevy of other guests, talking about movies like Moonraker, Alien, The Black Hole, and more. Tune in, this one is a ton of fun.
So strap on your Condor Man wings and soar into the future with us over at patreon.com/spyhards.
But before Big O zaps us with a red pulsating laser, let's get back to the Spy Jinx.
Well, dislikes, and I have a feeling this might be a shorter chapter in the story, but I will lead us off with, I absolutely can't stand the death of Kananga.
Right. I mean, you're not alone on that one.
I think it's pretty comical. I mean, the film is comical, so I get that side of things, but for all of the good that Yaphet Kotto does in this film, I kind of wanted to go out in a blaze of glory, not a blaze of hot air.
Okay. Can I say, did you want to go, Cam, before I say something?
Go ahead. No, please.
Okay.
Take me down.
I 110% agree with you. The end of this movie is so small and disappointing when you think, okay, what's the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service? Piz Gloria, right? This amazing thing where all these people descend. There's this great shootout. That the thing explodes. There's the bobsled chase. Fantastic, right? You Only Live Twice doesn't get any better than that. Infiltrating the volcano, amazing. Then you have in Diamonds Are Forever. Okay, it's not great, but you have the shootout on the oil derrick.
Yeah,
it's okay. Blofeld being stupid, but and then you have the tag with the Winton kid on the boat. Also dumb, but not awful. This is just ridiculous because it's so small. You miss obviously Ken Adam because these sets are terrible. They're small, this little underground bunker. It looks like the end of a TV show. It culminates with this little Whisper being trapped in the couch.
Yeah.
And then and then this little knife fight, which you mentioned was like at least Yaphet Kotto did what he could to make it interesting. And then to do more like Killer Sharks, and then we're gonna plus it by having, we knew the dart had to pay off at some point. So now he inflates him and he blows up. It's terrible. And so what's the big action coda? It's the poppy fields being blown up. Who cares? We have no stake in that whatsoever. The heroin trade. Oh, I'm going to give away free heroin to everyone. I'm going to create a generation of addicts, right? It's like, what? It's like, it's the caper is ridiculous. The ending, the payoff is terrible. Because again, Live and Let Die is a movie of great moments. It's not a great movie. It doesn't start well. It doesn't end well. I mean, it has all these dumb, but then it has these really fun set pieces. And it has, anytime Bond is in a chair and Yaphet Kotto is asking him questions is great. That whole thing where he's getting really mad at Bond for having deflowered Seymour is fantastic because Yaphet Kotto is so good. He keeps asking these questions. And then when he said, you had every chance. And I mean, it's like, he's like in another movie. He's like acting in another movie.
Yeah.
It's like where there's real stakes and there's like grounded and everything. And even when he first meets Bond at the beginning, and Bond's all like, making excuses for why he's there and, they're not having it. And Teehee's great because he's just like this avuncular hench person, it's just like with his little weird arm, but he's just like, but so, yeah, the ending, I hate the ending. The ending's terrible. And Yaphet Kotto hated the ending, but I don't know anybody who likes that ending.
Yeah, like the Teehee exit, kind of the postscript on that is effective. On the train, like that's fun.
It's a retread of From Russia with Love, but it's fun.
And then they do it again in Golden Gun.
Well, yes, of course, but thank God it's there because I think it is a pick me up after the very underwhelming Kananga balloon sequence, which maybe there's a way to make that work, but they clearly couldn't. And the way they shoot it, where they had to zoom in and the film is grainy, like it clearly wasn't working. But instead of pivoting and trying something else, or even just staging a shark death or something like that, they stuck with it.
It's also like what Mark said is right about it, just the set feeling just cheap. It feels like out of a Hammer horror film. It's like Pit and the Pendulum was filmed next door or something.
Yeah.
And claustrophobic, small and claustrophobic. The fact this is all taking place underneath the poppy fields in this type. Like the coolest thing is at one point you see like they have this monorail.
Yeah.
You don't see it. And this is the problem. The movie that's unforgivable. The Bond movies are starting to feel smaller and smaller, and that's why they had a course correct after Golden Gun. Spy Who Loved Me marks the emergence of Bond movies being big and epic and cool again. And but if they had kept going in the direction of Live and Let Die, I mean, the franchise would be over.
I don't think we'd be here.
Yeah.
Right now, talking. No, I don't think so. Cam, a dislike for you?
Well, for me, a dislike is actually the boat chase. And it's not necessarily like the boat stunts, which are incredible. And, they look great chopped up in a montage. But I've always felt like the boat chase, it's too prolonged. And during that section of the movie, I think the movie around it is carried a lot on the charm of Roger Moore, his sense of humor, his personality, the quips. When you get to the boat chase, Roger Moore is lost. A lot of it is a stuntman driving the boat. You're getting a lot of business with J.W. Pepper running around. You're getting some of the stuff with like Kananga's henchmen, going and trading boats and stuff like that. But Roger Moore's actual personality feels like it's pulled out of that sequence in a way where that is not the case with, say, him and Mrs. Bell in the plane, where he's interacting with Mrs. Bell. That boat chase, you just lose it. And so while I can sit there and I still find it funny when the boat crashes through the wedding or when it, one of the boats dives into J.W. Pepper's car, that stuff's all great. I just think like the extended nature of it, it just kills the energy of the movie.
Well, they were so proud of themselves that they were doing this incredible. I mean, I think I remember at the time that was the for the Guinness Book of World Records that which was a big deal in the 70s, like these Guinness Book records.
Yeah.
It was the longest a boat had ever traveled on land. So they set a record with that stunt, if I recall. And they were so proud of that. But yeah, there's just so you feel like you're in another movie, but it's all the J.W. Pepper movie. I'm going to get my brother and we're going to find that British secret agent guy. And, whatever. It was like, it was just so stupid. And so, a little goes a long way. And that's the problem. It's like, it's the same thing happens in Golden Gun. You have that great stunt going over the bridge, but they put the slide whistle and they call attention to it. Say, hey, look, it's a great stunt. That's when these things don't work. And I felt like it was the same thing with the with the boat chase. It's like almost like too much of a good thing isn't a good thing. I mean, look, as dopey as the alligator farm sequence is, it's great.
Oh yeah,
because James Bond is in jeopardy. how is he going to get out of it? He's surrounded by man-eating alligators. He's on the center of the bridge. The whole reason they don't just shoot him and drop him in the bayou is because it wouldn't be a movie, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but it's ridiculous that we're going to put Bond on this little island. We're going to let these crocodiles out, and they're going to eat him. But it's such a cool sequence. You can forgive all that because it's awesome. And then once he gets free and then starts luring them all into that, I don't even know why there was like a laboratory there. I guess they were experimenting on heroin or something, on making, peppermint flavored heroin or whatever. But
As you do.
But even that's like really cool, it's just like, you don't see, what other movie's going to do that, So it's like, it's cool, but like that's a Bond sequence. Like the boat chase you could see in any movie.
Yeah, I do like the ending of the boat chase where he pours the gasoline in the guy's eyes and the boat explodes and the music really kicks in at that point with the Bond theme, and you're like, okay, this is awesome. But it's just how, it's like, what, 14 minutes long or something.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were such a fan of setting people on fire, Cam. I'm a bit worried about you now, but we'll deal with that in your therapy session later. Mark, do you have a dislike you'd like to bring up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole chase scene during Mrs. Bell's airplane, it's so contrived. The whole idea that they, the wings are damaged, so it can't fly off. So they're just doing this sort of bumper cars with the planes. It's kind of, being chased. I don't know. It's very forced. Although I do love in the next scene where David Hedison is on the phone with Mr. Bleecker, apologizing and trying to make good on the destruction of the of his airport and his planes.
Well, you're not wrong though. I mean, you could play yakety sax over the airplane sequence if you wanted to. It's a total farce, but
it's a Buster Keaton thing, or
yeah, exactly. That is. I'd say the boats is probably the worst of the two sequences in terms of like just dragging it out. But that whole section of the film just stops developing the plot to do a bunch of stunts.
Yeah.
The second act is basically action, and then you come back and develop the plot in the third act. And if you're just here for the stunts, then it's great. But if you're trying to follow a character being developed or a story being developed, it just does sort of stop in its tracks to do amazing things.
I don't like that there's no plot. I don't like that Bond isn't smart throughout the movie. I mean, there's that attempt like at the Fillet of Soul where he's sitting there and the booth disappears. But then when they go to back to New Orleans, I think it is, he then says, no, we can't sit in the corner booth. We're going to sit in the middle, right? And then they're so stupid. It's like, oh, a call for you, Mr. Leiter.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have a clue that something is up. So he walks off and Bond's just sitting there listening to the song. And then the table goes down. It's like, just Bond just looks stupid. Like he's not prepared. And like how he keeps getting caught so flat-footed. And even, when he gets distracted, the fact that Rosie Carver is working for the villain and he's not onto that right away, that it takes him a while to kind of realize that. It's like, Jesus, come on. Half the time he knows it. He still sleeps with them, but he knows it. And this time he sort of has the wool, pulled over his eyes. I mean, so there are a lot of things that are wrong with the movie, but it doesn't keep me from enjoying it.
Sure. Yeah.
I look at the Bonds different than I do if I'm seeing a movie for the first time, you rate a certain criteria. Bond is just like a whole different, because it's wrapped up in nostalgia and this whole epic franchise and all these other movies and the type of Bond and the age we were when we saw it. It's like there's a whole different grading scale for Bond movies than anything else.
I don't think many people listening to this would disagree with you. It is definitely a comfort food series. And I think especially the Roger Moore films have definitely ingrained themselves into people's comfort food film watching. This is the one people tend to go back to. Not this film, but the Roger Moore era is the one people just tend to reach for when they want to just stick on a Bond film.
Yeah,
I've found over the years.
Well, you guys know, I just had the flu, right? So yeah, it was very hard to, you're not going to sit down and watch a movie you haven't seen before. So like, God help me that, the movie I turned on more than I Spy Love Me and Moonraker, I watched more than anything when I was sick. If I needed something to just turn on, those are the movies I watched. The Spy Love Me, it's a great movie. I'll go to the mattresses for that one. Moonraker is not. And yet I've watched that. That tends to be my comfort food a lot when I'm not feeling well, or I just want to throw something on, Bond movie, Moonraker, because like From Russia with Love, I have to watch from the beginning to the end because it's great. And it's like a lot of these movies I have to watch the whole film. I can't. Moonraker, I'll just watch for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Spy Love Me, like when I'm not feeling well, I was able, break up into multiple nights. Whereas most Bond movies, like I have to watch the whole thing.
Well, we can say all three of us have shared a stage to talk about Moonraker at one point in time.
That's right.
Yes, we have.
Yeah,
we did. We had a lot of fun doing that.
We did. Well, final notes and then knock list time. I've got a couple of little things I've observed. Cam, why don't you start us off?
There was a couple things I had. The pinch the finger sequence is like the true suspense in the movie, where Teehee has the claw hooked onto Bond's finger.
Mm-hmm.
That is like maybe the most suspenseful moment in the entire Moore era, perhaps. Like, it's really tense. It's really well shot by Guy Hamilton there, and really well staged.
Yeah, I'd actually completely forgotten about that scene until you mentioned it. But there is kind of like that sort of. Well, I mean, we know Bond's not going to lose his finger.
No,
it's not going to happen. But still, you're like swept in for a second.
Yeah,
but it's what I was talking about earlier. Is that Yaphet Kotto is another movie? He's taking this really seriously.
Yeah.
So when he says if she answers wrong, snap off the finger on. Bond's, and you generally are thinking, how is he going to get out of this? Yes, he's not going to lose his finger, but that's a very suspenseful. That whole scene is great.
Yeah, and right after that, you have Baron Samedi lighting the card on fire and holding that up. A great moment as well. That's
such a good button on the scene.
Yeah,
like after everything's gone down, and then he lights the card on fire. It's so great.
And the last thing I had was Kananga is in the water with Bond. The shark is coming at them, and Kananga starts pointing at the shark. Is that a reference to Connery pointing at the shark in Thunderball?
Oh.
I did not ask him that.
Because you have that moment where Connery was in the pool with the shark in Thunderball and didn't know there was going to be a shark there, and starts pointing at the shark.
That might be the observation of all time.
Right?
That's really interesting. I wish we knew. But we will never know what the truth is there.
I know. And then you go to Skyfall, and you have the villain pointing at the Komodo dragon.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of pointing at animals in these movies.
The Bond pointing trilogy. We've just found it.
Yeah.
Who knew? Who knew, folks? Only on Spy Hards.
That's such a disappointing sequence, that fight with the shark.
The Komodo.
No, not the Komodo. The shark with the fight. I'm not even going to get into that, but the fight with at the end of Live and Let Die with the sharks.
Yeah.
And even that whole thing where that's another Batman sequence. Oh, we're going to cut his arm so it drips blood and slowly lower them down into the shark infested waters below. But now because he's bleeding, he's going to, and then, I always hate when Bond has to rely on the gimmick. So he uses the Magno watch, and it's just like, there's too much gimmickry going on there. Like, it's always good for him. Like, the gadgets are really important, but you don't want that to, instead of his wits, to be the thing that he uses to get out of a situation. It's like when he uses the suitcase in From Russia with Love, it's the means to an end. He's the one coming up with this really clever ruse to convince Red Grant, to open the suitcase. So it's not like he's relying on the gadget. This is completely like fantasy. Like, oh, I'm going to use the Magno watch to get the inflatable pellet to come to me, and it's just like he's not using like his smarts to solve a problem in a way that makes sense.
Not like the Alligator Farm, where he tries to pull the boat and the boat's on the rope, so he has to think beyond that.
That was nice.
Yeah.
That was nice, because you think, okay, yeah, that's going to be the answer. So he has to do something much more complicated, which is that great stunt where they line up and he steps on each one of them, which is just the original Pitfall dig dug. It's like, I mean, that's why I love the game on Atari 2600 Pitfall, because it reminded me of Live and Let Die. But that whole ending in the water with that whole contrived, it's like when they used to tie the woman to the train tracks in the old silent movies. It's too much of that in this movie. And again, it's like you could say, okay, maybe in the Alligator Farm, they wanted to find the British to find, or the CIA to find his body eaten by crocodiles, because then that would be believable that maybe he, fell in the water and got eaten by a crocodile. They didn't want to just shoot him, so they know that they killed him, right? So I could buy that. But by now, he's in the underground lair in San Monique. There's no reason not to just kill him. But instead, we're going to go through this convoluted. We're going to cut his arm, and then we're going to drop him into the water, and it's just like.
For my little notes, positive and negative. Positive is, I think, a really underrated Roger Moore look is his neckerchief kite surfing suit that he then reverses the jacket round into a different suit. I think that's just a really great look. I wish I could pull that off.
I thought you were going to say the black turtleneck with the brown holster.
No, everyone knows that one.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the kite surfing one.
That's a good one. That's a good look. He looks badass in that.
Yeah.
Which it's not often that Roger Moore looks badass. He looks badass in that black turtleneck.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the revolver holsters and stuff as well.
He looks like Bullet or something. It's really impressive.
And the negative is people always talk about like some of the other moments in Bond history where they break the fourth wall. Like it didn't happen to the other fella or the janitor whistling Goldfinger in All Her Majesties.
Mm.
For my money, one of the worst wall-breaking moments happens in this film, which is the fact that Solitaire is using 007 branded cards.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't even remember that. I must have blocked that out.
They got 007 on the back.
They do?
Yeah.
Ooh, that's bad.
Wow.
I don't remember that. Wow.
Wow.
That's horrible.
It's like it's kind of like a funny design, but it does make out 007.
Wow. Oh.
I'm guessing it's so they could sell them, maybe.
Maybe. They could have done it anyway. I always hated that on the toys, like the submarine car. It would say 007 on it. Because when I wanted to play with the cards as kids, I didn't want to say 007.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to be like in the movies where, you know, he's undercover. He wouldn't have like 007. He's not wearing a sweatshirt that says 007 on it. So
I mean, he may as well be. Let's be fair.
Yeah, exactly. You're that secret agent guy, not that secret.
Yeah. Well, it's knock list time. We're finally here. The question that we endeavor to answer every week. And Cam, as we may have some new people joining us for our latest Bond adventure, can you just explain what the knock list is?
Yes, the knock list is our tortured acronym for Need to See Official Classics of the Spy Hearts podcast. So every week after we talk about a movie, we take a vote and determine whether it belongs in the pantheon of all-time great spy films. Some Bond movies that have made the list: Casino Royale and Skyfall. The first 5, I think, Connerys. And I think that's
contentiously.
Yeah, and On Her Majesty's made the list as well.
By the way, we didn't do quotes. I wanted to do quotes. I wanted to do that one thing where he says, the one thing that is great when they say that, this guy's working with our boys at the CIA here, to help with the secret mission. And he goes, whose side is he working for? There's for ours.
Oh.
A spy on whose side?
Yeah.
Secret agent.
Anyway, go on. Sorry.
No, it's fine. If we got into a J.W. Pepper conversation, I think we'd disappear into a black hole for another 45 minutes while we try and figure out why we're here. So, J.W. Pepper fans, I'll leave you be. But we're here to answer the knock list question. Is this joining the ranks of the best spy movies of all time? Guests always go first. Mark, you get the first vote. Would you put Live and Let Die on the list of the best spy movies of all time?
Let me just say something.
Go ahead.
We know what the best spy movies of all time are: From Russia with Love, The Ipcress File, North by Northwest. We did Spy Game. We talked about all Notorious. I mean, all these amazing. Live and Let Die doesn't belong anywhere near that list.
Right.
I mean, I may like Live and Let Die, and I may enjoy it. I may want to go watch it when we're done recording this podcast. Maybe, who knows? But it does not belong on a list of classics. It's notable because it's Roger Moore's first James Bond movie. It's notable for the prominent role of African-American actors in a Bond movie at the time. Mm-hmm. It's notable for a lot of it introduced J.W. Pepper. It's notable because, but so many notables. But does it belong in the Hall of Fame, the knock list? Absolutely not.
Okay, that's one no. It's all still to play for. There's 2 more votes. Cam, what do you have?
I struggled a little bit with this one, just a little, because when I look at the overall Moore era, there's like less opportunities in the back of my mind for inclusion on a knock list than, say, Connery had, for example. But I can't in good conscience say yes to this one. It is a no. I just think there's enough elements that we've talked about that just kind of pull it down. It doesn't hit that top tier Bond level, but to me, it's like a B+ Bond film that I always enjoy watching.
B-.
Okay.
It's not a knock.
List.
It's a B-.
Okay, maybe a B. We'll settle on a B.
Yeah, there we go. Meet in the middle. Well, it's 2 no's, so my vote doesn't mean anything, but I'll cast it
Sure
anyway.
it does.
It means something to the listeners because they keep score. It's also a no from me. I think there's a lot to love about this film, but I think ultimately it doesn't go down in the best Roger Moore Bond films, and it wouldn't go down in the best Bond films. It certainly wouldn't be in my top 10, and I think that's the majority of the knock list films. And I think there are too many. It's too unsure of itself, I think, in this first outing for Roger Moore. And I know where we're going. I know where he's going. And I think it's on to bigger and brighter things.
Yeah.
But there you go. 3 no's. And as such, Live and Let Die is not making the knock list. The dossier is complete and filed as classified. Mark Altman.
Unless Tom Cruise steals the knock list and adds it back on.
Well, I'm waiting for him to send us a cease and desist, but it's been 5 years, so we're doing all right at the moment. Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you back on the show to chart the first course of Roger Moore. I mean, we're big fans of Inglorious Trexperts. We're big fans of your books, and it's just a pleasure to have you back on.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you had told me as a kid looking at the Viewmaster of Live and Let Die that one day I would be recording a podcast about Live and Let Die after having written a book about James Bond, I would think you were crazy. But of course, I wouldn't know what a podcast is at the time either. But I'm always delighted to talk to you guys. It's so good to talk to people who are so knowledgeable. I really enjoy the show. You do great interviews with the talent behind these. I particularly loved the Ali Tamahori interview from a couple of months back. Just you're doing great work, and there are a lot of people who sit around and talk about movies, but they don't really know shit. And what's great about you guys is you really know your stuff. And I love listening to I used to love listening to James Bonding, which was a podcast about Bond movies, and they used to say it was very frustrating because they used to say we're James Bond lovers, not experts.
Yeah.
And they would get so much wrong that it was very frustrating. But it's true, they were lovers, not experts. What's great about you guys is you're lovers and experts. So and it's why it's always a pleasure to come on here and bullshit about this stuff. And who else cares about my memories of seeing Live and Let Die when I was 7 years old? So anyway.
Well, we got the Viewmaster story out of it, so like it was worth it.
Yeah.
It was absolutely worth it. And
I want to see that on social. I want to see like pictures of the Viewmaster.
I'm gonna find it. I'm gonna find it.
Now you know how the Viewmaster worked. This is interesting. We talked about this with Star Trek because, of course, the Omega Glory was released on Viewmaster because it was 3D. They didn't actually take images from the movie and turn them into 3D. They had a 3D camera and would shoot them on set exclusively for the Viewmaster. So if you look, that's why the special effects like on Omega Glory are not the special effects from the episode because they had to create them specifically for the Viewmaster. So if we actually find the images from the Live and Let Die Viewmaster, they will not be stills from the movie. They will be images from Live and Let Die you never saw.
Wow.
Recreation.
I've actually just found it. The stills from the Viewmaster blown up onto a YouTube. So I will put that online when this episode's out, and I'll just send Mark a link so you can have a look after this. But
it will bring back memories.
There you go. But so Mark, I urge everyone to check out Inglorious Trexperts. I urge everyone to check out the 4:30 movie. I urge everyone to buy all of your books. But where can people find your books online and find you?
Well, you can find me on all the major social channels. I think that even though I'm going to keep Inglorious Trexperts on Twitter, I think I'm going to leave Twitter because for me personally, it's a cesspool and I don't want to do anything that supports the Bond supervillain. So I'll be leaving Twitter, but you can find me on Blue Sky and you can find me on Instagram, and I guess on Threads, and Inglorious Trexperts will still be on Twitter because I don't think my compatriots feel as strongly as I do about what a hellscape that's become, or do they care? Apparently. But yeah. So, and then of course you can buy the book on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. It's still in print, and I think it's quite good, if I do say so myself. I'm very proud of that book, and also, I think by the time this episode drops, we'll have announced the fact that we'll be returning to the Star Trek Las Vegas stage for curating 4 days of Inglorious Trexperts goodness, where we do a lot of more deeper dives into Star Trek and its talent and a lot of behind the scenes. And once again, we're thrilled and delighted to welcome the Spy Hards back to be talking about all kinds of cool espionage stuff in Star Trek, which is more relevant than ever. So if you want to see Cam and Scott live in Vegas, we're going to be welcoming them back this August, and you can find out more at creationent.com. Hopefully we'll get to see you guys in Vegas live.
Yeah, we'll be posting all about that online when it happens. When we have our sort of panels all lined up, we'll give you more information about that for sure, folks. You can come and catch us live and in living color if that's something that tickles
Like the
your fancy.
Viewmaster. You'll be in
That's
3D.
right.
That's
We'll
right.
be in 3D, but don't touch us,
Right,
please.
exactly.
We're the talent now, you know.
Don't go anywhere near me. Especially if you're in a scooter, stay far away.
That's a STLV story for another day. But Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure talking Live and Let Die. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Thank you. Mark Altman will return. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks for having me, Cam. Thanks for having me, Scott.
Well, there you go, folks. That was the first Roger Moore film. Live and Let Die is in the bag. I can't believe it.
I know, right? It's happened, and we're going to be on to very exciting things in the future.
There's going to be lots of quips. There's going to be the odd slide whistle. It's all happening.
It's going to be all gold and nothing else.
Well,
it's going to be an all-time high.
It's going to be some gold and some silver and a bit of bronze.
Roger Moore is going to take on the world and win.
He certainly is. He certainly is. And, you know, I want to thank Mark for a few things. Firstly, for coming on, spending the time with us to talk about Live and Let Die, a film he loves. And I want to thank Mark for sharing the Yaphet Kotto interview with us all. This is something brand new to the world that we're birthing, and I think you're all going to get something out of it. It's not often you get to hear from Yaphet himself vocally about his time working on Bond, because he's not with us anymore. And I think it's such a rare opportunity. I really hope you all enjoy it. And I will, again, urge you all to go and grab a copy of Nobody Does It Better, the complete, uncensored, unauthorized oral history of James Bond, available wherever you get your books online. Just Google it. Google Mark Altman. He co-wrote it with Edward Gross. They've written before a bunch of really great books on oral history of sort of franchise media, Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica. There's a lot to check out there. There'll be links in the show notes below. It's got the Spy Hard seal of approval. But more. I know you like it. Cam, what about next week? I think we've mentioned it already, but I just want to sell it one more time.
Yes, we are going to be presenting Mark A. Altman's interview with Yaphet Kotto. You've heard a lot about it in this episode. It's going to be a really exciting deep dive into Live and Let Die from, a man who's no longer with us. So this is going to be really cool.
Yeah, we can't oversell it anymore. I know we've had some big names in the past. Denise Richards, Jacqueline Bisset, Lana Wood, Luciano Paluzzi. Yaphet Kotto is joining those ranks of exclusive interviews you're only going to get on Spy Hards.
Yeah, that's right.
We just love giving you those Spy Master interviews, folks, and we hope you love them too. So your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to join us next week as we present to you Mark Altman's chat with Mr. Yaphet Kotto, Mr. Big Kananga himself on Spy Hards. Hope you all enjoy. If you like what you've heard on this episode, please consider joining us over on our Patreon, patreon.com/spyhards. There's also a link in the show notes below. Aren't we well prepared? If you haven't already taken a look, very affordable over there, and you're just helping keep the lights on here at Spy Hards HQ. You're helping us get these interviews, make these contacts with people, pay for hosting, all this sort of stuff that basically is part of running a podcast that we do for free for you here every week. We haven't missed a week in almost 5 years. If you could spare the dime, we'll gladly take it from you, and we thank you if you can. If you want to continue the conversation about Live and Let Die, we'll be on social media for the next few weeks talking all about it, all about the interviews we're doing. You can find us anywhere at SpyHards, SPYHARDS on X, Instagram, Facebook, and we're on Blue Sky as well at spyhards.bsky.app, I think it is. I never remember how the handles work over there. But until next time, folks, Cam, get me a make on a white pimpmobile.